Want to know what's driving college football realignment? It's all about TV value. We've applied a weighted moving average to 11 years of Nielsen-rated TV data to rank and rate every single ACC team. We'll show you who the networks love using the network blue chip ratio and who in the conference is at risk of getting left behind. Let's get started. I am your professor, the Wild Ute, and I have here College Football Mafia contributor, Sergeant Pickles. How's it going, Pickles?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm teacher's assistant Pickles today. I only got into Wild Ute University with my GI Bill. I'm not smart enough otherwise. So I'm happy to be here.
Nonsense. All right, so Pickles, tell everybody about your project, which you just completed, because it's absolutely relevant to today's discussion.
Yeah, with the ongoing stuff in the ACC, I mean, TV values are more important than ever. And I was looking for a way to expand the data set, expand how many games we're looking at. And I managed to I basically compiled every single game that Sports Media Watch has listed from 2012 to present. We did omit 2020 just because it was a crazy year and the numbers are going to be quite skewed. But that in total gave us over 3,800 games to analyze. So it's a massive data set. I was happy to do it, but I'm not the data cruncher. So I leave it to Mr. Professor Ute to give us the breakdown of all those numbers.
Definitely juicy stuff here. So everybody, for the methodology of this analysis we're going to discuss here, Sergeant Pickles put together 11 years of Nielsen-rated data. We're going to be slicing through that. Okay, a couple new concepts here. So a weighted moving average approach. So that means that more recent data has more weighting than older data because it's more relevant than older data too. So every single year in this model that we're going to be presenting, the data is becoming less and less relevant, and it's basically becoming 9% less relevant every year.
Yeah, definitely. And it is a way to account for the fact that obviously certain schools were in the Pac-12 and in the Big East. That's how far back this data set goes. You had Big East games compiled. True. So it's a really expansive list.
Perfect. And then it excludes the COVID year. So that's back in 2020. 2021 range, 1 year out for COVID games. And then lastly, this is an assumption that's made too, that every single non-Nielsen rated game, so a game that's on the ACC network, if it was on a different network, Raycom or whatever, the assumption here is we're giving a flat 150,000 viewer average. So if you didn't have a Nielsen rating game, you get 150,000 viewers in that spot. That is an assumption making now. So this isn't just raw data. This is adjusted data to get more accurate. And so those are the methodology assumptions that we're going to get into. But let's dive into this now. Okay. Here's something new here. The network blue chip ratio. This needs to be discussed before getting into the heart of the matter here with the ranking and grades of ACC viewership teams. So what this is telling you, the blue chip ratio for network is how often a school is getting selected to be on an ESPN, an ABC, a Nielsen-rated network. So this would mean that the primetime broadcasts, anything that's on the ACC network that's on something that's even less viewership relevant is not going to be included in a Nielsen-rated game. So this ratio tells you how often each one of these schools got onto a big-time broadcast. What do you think about that, Pickles?
I mean, obviously the networks are doing the same kind of math that you're attempting to do. And it's not just a popularity contest. They want the biggest TV numbers possible. You know, they don't actually care what team is in place. They're trying to sell advertising. So eyeballs on television is the real metric. So this kind of shows you, even in their analysis, who they're feeling is going to bring them the best product. The one standout for me that I noticed was Stanford. And I think you and I both agreed that had a lot to do with their Notre Dame games.
Notre Dame games. I mean, they play Notre Dame every year. This is 11 years of data. So Stanford, 62% of the games got on a Nielsen-rated channel. So they've got a 62% blue chip ratio. And the number one, non-surprising here, is Clemson, because they've had an amazing run, amazing brand. 72% of all Clemson games are on a super good channel, an ideal time spot that you want. With lastly on this list, Boston College coming in pretty dang low, less than 30% of all the games on a Nielsen-rated channel. That is rough. This is basically the kingmaker ratio here, because networks do make your ratings, but they select the biggest brands and they do play kingmaker. That's part of this game.
Yeah,
Right.
I think it's a couple of standouts. I mean, Cal obviously stands out. I think that has to do with the way the Pac-12 did it also. They had a pretty healthy rotation of teams getting that primetime slot, which in the end may not have helped the conference. But I'd also say NC State, I know in your previous analysis, I perceived as a team that's being put out there as a better brand in the ACC, and the networks don't seem to agree for some reason.
Yeah, the Wolfpack have been almost disrespected as far as the blue chip ratio goes, just not getting in ideal TV spots that often, less than a 50% ratio and stuff. If NC State came over to the Big 12, that would change quick. That would change that brand and grow that brand. It's almost a certainty after looking at something like this. But let's move on now and let's get to the rankings. This is just like the setup here. All right, one illustration first. This is just a chart graph that just shows on how information is becoming less relevant over time on this Nielsen-rated viewership information. So 2024 information is going to have 100% weighting, and every year it's going to decline by 9%. The COVID year is going to be thrown out completely. But this is just a graph that reflects that. Numbers decay 9% per year and stuff to get an accurate weighted moving average. And here we go. Here's a standard distribution. This is the last time you saw a standard distribution, Pickles. It's been a while, huh?
Oh, goodness. How long have I been out of high school? It's been a while.
Okay, so here's our range here. So this distribution is important because it assigns different segments or bins that are determining our grades that we're handing out here. So all of the 17 schools in the ACC that we're taking a look at fall onto this distribution. And depending where you're falling, which we'll get into, you're going to get an A level, B level, C level, D level, or an F grade as far as the grade goes. But this shows that there's actually some statistical analysis that went into this determination. So it's just not us making up these figures or anything and assigning the letter grades. There's actually some analysis that went into this. Let's just go on and see here. Let's see where the teams are grading out. Let's go to first the F level here. There's 5 schools here that are hit the F level in the ACC as far as a TV viewership product, TV value. Virginia, Boston College, Duke, Wake Forest, and SMU. Which one stands out?
I mean, this is obviously football only, so seeing Duke on any F tier when they're highly regarded as a basketball brand. But football only, I think Virginia, only because we've heard them as one of these SEC Big Ten type expansion targets. They're a state flagship school. They're heavy into research. I know that's a huge factor. But to be in the F tier when football viewership is really driving the whole bus right now, it's pretty surprising to still see them talked about so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're just not a big football brand. Basketball, they bring some to the table. These are football-only metrics that we're looking at for viewership, no basketball figures included. Virginia is surprising. Boston College is surprising too, although we did see in the blue chip ratio, they don't really get on TV very often. They're not a network favorite. The other ones, like your Wake Forest, your SMUs, that's not necessarily surprising, especially since SMU just came up from the American, where they're just not inherently going to get the best TV time spots, and they're not going to get big ratings. I would expect that to grow in the future, but this is F level right here. The 5 schools out of the 17 that show up in that F level quadrant of the distribution.
Real quick on SMU, I mean, obviously it's weighted toward the present, so their recent years games are going to matter the most, and obviously they had a fantastic season. Sure. But referring back, their blue chip ratio was actually much better than the other schools here in the F tier. So I think we do have to see that adjustment to being in a power conference, but SMU's got some ground to make up.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on here. There's one D- handed out here.
Yeah.
And they barely skated by from the F area segment. And that's the Cal Golden Bears.
Oh,
Cal gets on it a lot, but they just don't drive a huge amount of TV viewership, guys. That's the story with Cal and the Pac-12. Pickles and I remember that as Ute and Washington Husky fans and stuff. Cal was on a lot, but again, they just don't have that fan base.
They went through a downswing in recent decade or so. They've had good years in the past, but there's just something about that Bay Area market. They never really hit it big, even when their teams are having great seasons. I'm not sure why that is.
Yeah, it's not surprising. Cal D-. Here's a D, the D level here. This one's shocking.
Yeah.
NC State and Syracuse, the one that's D level, most shocking is the Wolfpack. Look, you can tie this to how often they're getting on TV. We know that's a low figure based on the blue chip ratio, but still, I would have thought that NC State would have been a little bit more of a driver in football TV ratings over the last 11 years when you're taking a weighting that's biased towards more recent years. This is the first shock on the list is NC State.
Yeah.
Scoring out of D.
Their blue chip ratio definitely hurt them, as you saw in the first graph. They're just, for some reason, they're not put on TV as much as even UNC or Duke. I believe that they were under Duke or right in that vicinity, but North Carolina is being put on the primetime slots much more than them. I don't know. NC State, I'm not sure why that is. And as we go through this, I know you'll give us a little more context into what could be the determining factor. But before anyone accuses you to being biased against the Wolfpack backpack, this is hundreds of games analyzed, and this is just what it spit out.
Exactly. This is what the data spit out. And why could that be? I mean, what's impacting your ability to get on a major network to drive better viewership? Your brand, number one. Number two is your ranking, matchups, really how much you're winning, your ranking, and how strong your brand is. And NC State, well, they've won. It's been a little bit up and down over the last several years, some good years, some tough years. That's basically kind of explaining it all, but it kind of speaks also to the brand. And the brand strength just might not be as strong for the Wolfpack. And then Syracuse, Syracuse is just not discussed very often. It's a great location up in New York, and it has so much to offer as a realignment candidate. But Syracuse, as far as a football property, it's
these predominantly basketball schools, that might actually work against them in this particular instance because their brand is known, but people might not necessarily be tuning in for their football.
Exactly. All right, here we can move on. Here's the D+ tier. You got the Tar Heels. Look, I'm surprised that UNC actually had better ratings over the last 11 years than NC State. I would have thought that NC State would have pulled ahead a little bit, but actually UNC won this contest between football viewership and then the Pitt Panthers too. Pitt's one of those schools that ends up on ESPN2 every freaking week. They're just like a darling for ESPN2, which is good because it's helping your blue chip ratio, but it's not the best place to be watching a game, and it's not the biggest realignment or viewership driver in all this too.
Yeah, people shouldn't look like D+ doesn't mean they're like some terrible program that nobody watches. It's a tough conference. It's a power conference, and you have to be critical about these things. So Pitt, they've contended for conference in recent years. I think that drove their numbers up a little bit. But like you said, ESPN2, they just love throwing them on there. And if a network likes where you fit in your particular slot, both geographically and just time slot wise, it makes sense that if they're getting consistent numbers back, they're going to keep plugging you in there.
Absolutely. And UNC with Bill Belichick, expect them to jump heavy this next year. If we're reassessing things in 2026 with the same type of list, based on the weighted moving average and Bill Belichick, I expect them to tier up to maybe a C tier or even a B-. Actually, it's going to be that strong.
Yeah, it's going to be a mini primetime effect where we didn't do the Colorado breakdown, but just looking at the raw games, as soon as you hit 2023, Colorado shot to the moon, and their average was much, much lower before that. So, North Carolina is certainly capable of the same with Belichick.
Yep. All right, C- here. We're in the C level, and Virginia Tech, the Hokies, had a C- over the last 11 years. It's a little bit surprising. I've taken a look at many years of viewership data, and I kind of have a feel for Virginia Tech. Before I got into a lot of the analysis, though, I would have been absolutely shocked that VT wasn't one of the top drivers in football viewership. But this is how it's been for a while now for the Hokies.
Yeah, the curious thing, although it's a C-, of all the schools in the states of Virginia and North Carolina, they're the tops. They're tops of all six of them. Yeah. And those are the states being often discussed about Big Ten SEC expansion. So it's interesting. I get there's other factors, but Virginia Tech doesn't really seem to be getting a lot of play with, moves to these bigger conferences. But Big 12 should have them completely highlighted, circled, double starred, in my opinion, for you got to have an offer ready for the Hokies because they're strong relative to where they are.
Virginia Tech is a fantastic fit for the Big 12 conference. Totally agree with that.
Yep.
And hey, when Virginia Tech wins and they're consistent winner, they can drive viewership. And it's been up and down too much for the Hokies and everything. But hey, 10 years plus ago, outside of our data range, they had really strong viewership. So they've been there before.
Yeah.
They've got a brand stuff. They just need to reignite that thing up there just to really get into the different level of tiers and stuff as far as these grades go. All right. This one's a little bit surprising. Georgia Tech with a C. Man, Georgia Tech has a massive monster games in 2024 as far as ratings go. Georgia Tech, Florida State, Georgia Tech really propped them up and everything and tiered them up.
Yeah.
But you're looking at a weighted moving average, but dang, the Yellow Jackets showing out with the C.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big enough data set that it can't just be all their game against Georgia driving this thing up as far as it is. Sure. They obviously pull a decent amount of eyes, and we've always, the running gag with college football mafias, Georgia Tech is that, sleeping giant down there in the South, but there's something to be said being in the heart of Atlanta, and they're holding their own in an ACC where it's kind of cutthroat, and it's that middle tier of the ACC is really crowded in terms of trying to get on networks, as your blue chip ratio showed. So Georgia Tech, a lot of promise, I think.
Yeah, it's really good for the realignment prospects to see something like this. There's a lot to sell. If the football's pretty good, the viewership's pretty good, the market's great. There's a lot there to like for Georgia Tech. They are kind of a rising program as far as realignment predictions and rankings go. All right, we're getting into the B level here. A B minus grades go to the Louisville Cardinals and the Stanford. So here we go. B minus. What do you think about that, Pickles?
In a weird way, I think they're similar stories because you had the Andrew Luck years with Stanford and, Jim Harbaugh down there. They had some really great seasons, as we know, in the Pac-12, and they would get eyeballs. They'd be put into primetime slots. And I think the same with Louisville in recent years. They've had winning seasons. They had Lamar Jackson. They've had, not quite that elite level, but they've been contenders for New Year's Six games and, big bowl games. I think this is showing that over the past decade, they have had success. Stanford obviously has taken a huge downturn, but I think this shows their potential when they do have a winning team that for whatever reason, even compared to Cal, Stanford draws more eyeballs in that market than Cal does.
Well said. Stanford has a brand.
Yeah.
When they win, folks will watch, they'll get on TV. It's just that way. I mean, they've got a solid brand. One thing that's kind of blowing my mind here is just looking at Louisville Cardinals and the Stanford Cardinal. How awkward, how weird is that? Yeah. Anyway, Louisville's no surprise. One of the best draws in the ACC football-wise and stuff. This is in the Lamar Jackson era. This data is including that. More recent success. So the Cardinals are a really good draw for football. B minus. Now we're moving up here. Again, the top cream. A minus here for the Miami Hurricanes. What do you think about that?
Not surprising in the scope of the entire history of their program, but I guess surprising considering the years our data set includes. Because 2012 to present, Miami's been pretty up and down, but it shows, our friends Rock and Rant and those guys, Miami watches their football, even if their team is maybe on a little bit of a difficult path in recent years. But Miami has monster potential. I mean, we've seen when they win national championships, they draw all sorts of eyeballs from across the country. So Miami's always going to be in that top tier of coveted programs in the ACC.
Attractive realignment candidate for many reasons.
Yes.
Market, viewership, brand. Miami Hurricanes have a strong brand. Folks watch Miami. They know Miami. They like the colors. It's not surprising they're here. We're in the top 3 realm right now of all these rankings. Miami is a top 3 brand in the ACC, and an A minus is a strong showing for the Hurricanes. Expect that just to continue in the future too, because the football program is humming right now. And that gets us to the last, an A plus tier.
Yep.
Okay, y'all. So we saw a lot of more difficult grades, a lot of D's and F's. And the reason for that in the distribution is because of the polar ratings that were drawn by these two programs. A plus for Florida State and Clemson, almost identical in the model that we built as far as viewership strength over the last 11 years when you weight it. my goodness, we've got two mighty strong brands. Miami is behind them, a little bit behind them, but really those three have pulled away from everybody else pretty far. And these two are so polar that they actually drag everybody else down pretty significantly. But any surprises here, Pickles?
No surprise. I guess the only thing is that maybe I expected Florida State in the data to take a half step back because you're weighting that most recent season so heavily, and they really struggled. But in a struggle season, they still drew eyes. People wanted to watch Florida State. Florida State fans turn out for their team even in difficult years. So I think that's a really big thing going forward. And as far as looking at it as a whole, now that we've revealed all the teams, perception is reality. And, you know, when people describe a top heavy conference, I think that's exactly what we're looking at with these two and also Miami, these three teams.
Great point on Florida State's difficult 2024. A lot of hate watching going on for the Noles, you'd imagine there.
Maybe, yeah.
Speaks to the brand strength. Clemson's no surprise. Clemson's been good for a long time. They're in the college football playoff. This last year, Dabo, everything, all these runs they've been on. These are two biggest boys right here in the ACC for football viewership. No surprise to anybody that watches a lot of football. Talk about them all the time on College Football Mafia. These are A+. And again, they're so strong that they drive everybody else, the grades down significantly. So let's just take a visual of all the grades that we've already outlined here.
Oh, wow. It's even more surprise. I guess not surprising, but just seeing it in chart form, how drastic the drop off is staggering.
Yeah, you can see the polars here. So you get your two A+ with Florida State and Clemson, SMU's that growing brand that's been an American. They're lowest on the scale too in the F tier. But really, these are the breakouts and everything. And you can kind of see the numbers in the chart form. That's really your weighted average, if you want to call it like your power ranking, power score for viewership, your viewership score, your strength of the last 11 years when you're including all the data. And, you know, Florida State and Clemson, pretty dang strong. And like there is a steep drop off, Miami, and then it just kind of trends down from there and stuff. But that F tier consists of 5 schools right there. You know, like that's pretty revealing how heavy and top heavy the ACC is here.
Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit different data because you have Stanford and Cal mostly in the Pac-12 concerning our data set, but weighted toward the present, you can see Cal is still a tick up from even those bottom schools in the ACC. The distribution is crazy. We know Florida State and Clemson benefited hugely because they've had national championship runs in the last decade. So that's definitely what's driving these forward. But it's so clear. Even if they didn't have a national championship run, but still had very strong seasons, I have a hard time believing that they wouldn't be in the top of the data set even then.
Yep. So final takeaways, the network darlings, blue chip ratio shows Clemson and Florida State. No surprise with the strongest viewership scores too. They're on TV all the time. They're selected by the networks. They are the darlings. Then you've got your schools like your Boston colleges that need to get more exposure. They want more exposure and stuff to get better viewership down the line. This all matters. It's super relevant too because of the new brand initiative where they're going to be taking a 5-year weighted moving average look at viewership and then assigning 60% of the ACC distributions from ESPN as compensation to the more televised brands. So this is giving a snapshot of that. This is giving a longer time horizon than 5 years, but this is important stuff. And who the networks pick and who they play kingmaker with is pretty revealing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get other ACC schools, you know, we're not trying to dump on you. That's not why we're here. This is just the natural way that conferences go. You're going to have your strong teams and your teams that don't drive it as much. That's true of every single conference. And I think there is certainly a perception of all the networks just love these teams, and that's why their viewership is so good. Yes, obviously being put in a big time slot matters, but they're crunching the same numbers that we are, and they know if I put XYZ team in this slot, it's better for me than, you know, this other team that I'm putting in. So, like I said, perception is reality, and sometimes the strongest brands, they're getting put in these slots for a reason.
Great stuff, and thanks for coming on, Pickles.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to you for crunching all these numbers. I can put the data together, but nobody breaks it down like you, my friend.
After breaking down the numbers, it is clear that some ACC schools are major realignment drivers, while others struggle to get the national exposure that they probably deserve. But what happens to these lower end schools when the next realignment cycle shakes out? That is a huge question mark. Now I want to hear what you think about that. Where do these lower end schools end up? In which conference? Let me know in the comments. And if you've liked this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more college football news and realignment updates. Class is dismissed.